Season 10, Episode 15 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop, and I'm a little tired. I ran 5 miles yesterday.
No, wow, that's great. I'm a little tired. I woke up to go to a 7 a.m. Book club discussion.
What? Seriously?
Yeah, yeah.
What's the book and who's the club?
G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy. It's one of the Thomistic Institute reading groups.
I was
Uh,
going to guess that.
yeah, and they have. Were you? This is my alley. Well, I didn't get up any earlier than usual. Usually, I do get up at 6 anyway to head to the gym. So it's
Hmm.
really just replacing gym in the morning on Mondays with a discussion group. Yeah, this is I think the third discussion group I've been a part of with the Thomistic Institute now that I've been here at University of Florida.
And how many people are part of this group that gets up at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning?
Like 10.
Oh my
Good.
God,
That,
really?
that's why it has to be at 7 because it's like the only time that works for 10 different people to meet 10 different college students.
Are there any women?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, it's I think
Really?
it's I think it's 3 and 7.
Three women?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Interesting. Thought they had better sense. But
That's great. Yeah. Well, I'm tired too today, but hopefully we can still have a good discussion on this
we'll have
chapter.
a lively discussion.
Yes, we are of course. I don't know if I mentioned we are of course reading Thomas Sowell's the Thomas Sowell Reader, going through the
Yes.
second half of the section, going through some of his articles on educational issues, problems with academia, things like that. A lot of these were about like specifically what universities sort of expect from professors and kind of make them do in order to keep having a job and how that sort of impacts the educational system. I thought those were pretty interesting because if I do go into academia, as is kind of the plan, I mean that's sort of the problems I'll probably be running into in the future.
Well, hope not. Hope they'll all be fixed by that
Mm.
time.
I thought you were going to say you hope I don't go into academia.
Well, there's that thought too, but we need we need good, smart, organized educators.
Mm.
That will be demanding but not a jerk about it.
Very true.
Speaking of educators, I had my class canceled this semester
Really? Oh, you
due
mentioned
to the
that.
lack of interest.
I think you mentioned that last time. I can't imagine that there was a lack of interest.
Well, that's also good because I have a lack of interest in that. Real estate law. And I keep trying not to practice law litigation, meaning representing clients in real estate law. But I guess nobody else does it in our county because I keep getting cases and I keep
Hmm.
trying to figure out how to not take the cases. But sometimes as a small town lawyer, you kind of have to because you kind of owe it to people. Not really owe it, but it's like they're a good client or they're a friend. And anyway, but I may be picking up. I'm doing the summer course, which I actually have to pick my formally designate my course book for that. That's a June class, but then I might be picking up civil litigation in the
Hmm.
fall instead
Oh, there
of
you go.
contract law or real estate law, which are so boring.
Yeah.
Civil litigation could be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make the other stuff interesting, but it's hard.
Hmm.
A lot of work to try to
Yeah.
make that interesting.
Yeah. I can imagine.
So I'm like, I don't even like it.
Well, speaking of making things interesting for students, that's sort of
Yes.
the target of the first article. It calls the idiocy of relevance. Uh,
Excellent segue. That's
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Which is really sort of directed more towards like high school students, right? And so there's this really predominant idea among like high school educators, like middle school educators, that you have to make every single thing immediately relevant to the students, which doesn't mean like make them interested in a topic. It means change sort of how you teach the topic so that it relates directly to something in their own experience, right? To make it sort of
right.
pop culture related in some fashion. Do anything you possibly can to keep their attention in any way. And of course, his point in that in this article as well, if you boil everything down, just make it so like just basically appealing, right? That's not nearly as important as just making sure they know what it is that they need to know, right? That should be the number one goal of the educator, not making sure that the students are entertained in every single class they take.
Well, yeah, and he mentions how I think he said it was a girl that mentioned to him economics, and he'd never even heard the term
Mm.
before when he was in high school. And of course, he became a great economist and studied it and wrote about it for the rest of his life. And he mentions that what he calls the fetish of relevance. Says the fetish of relevance has been particularly destructive in the education of minority students at all levels. if the students do not see immediately how what they are studying applies to their lives in the ghetto, then it's supposed to be irrelevant. And that's really what you're getting at is describing his arguments. And it's so true, you know, it's hard. I mean, it is hard because, you know, as an educator, you have to answer the question, why do I have to learn this? And why are you teaching it? You
Mhm.
know, and you have to be able to explain that. And one way to explain it is, well, um, you know, the very basic elementary level, hopefully it's the basic elementary level, when you're teaching them how to count change back, you know, make change for a five or something, it has a real practical relevance in their lives. Although now it may not as much because it's
Mhm.
all electronic, but you'd still have to know how much change would be credited to your account or not deducted. Um, but you know, there are some things that you know you should have an explanation of why it's important to learn it. But you know, like I took my introduction to philosophy class, and I did not intend to be a philosophy major. But when I took there was an old, I forget his name. I have him in a transcript somewhere. He's long since passed away, but he was an older guy, and I think he might have smoked a pipe because he always had like he had a beard. It was kind of like tobacco stained beard. You know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about? That
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
yellowish. And he was ancient back when I was a freshman in college, and he just had such a he started the first class with an explanation. I took it, I think it's two semesters. His philosophy one and two, if I remember correctly. So, but the first class, he answered the question, why study ancient philosophy? You know, what is the relevance of Plato and Socrates today? And he did a really good job of trying to put it into perspective, and he also later in the semester explained why he studied. I forget who it was, but um, it was a philosopher that was um, either supported the Nazis or was an actual Nazi. Like you know,
Mhm.
and for some reason I'm thinking the name Spencer, but I don't know if that's right or not.
Huh.
But whatever, whoever it was, he had like the collect all the volumes that this guy had ever published, and he had in his bookshelf at home. And he invited another philosophy. But he told us the story. He invited another philosophy professor, highly regarded, colleague of his, to dinner at his house. And the colleague was, why do you have all of this all of this guy's books? You know,
Mhm.
don't you know he's a Nazi or he supported the Nazis or whatever it was? He's like, of course I do. I mean, that's the whole point. Because how do you refute uh, bad philosophy, but by understanding it and being able to convince its supporters that it's wrong, you
Mhm.
know, and so you almost have to know that more.
Yeah.
And I always stuck with me, and that's true relevance. Now it might not really mean anything to you in your day to day life, but it can, you know,
Mhm.
on occasion. So I think that's kind of what
Yeah.
Thomas Sowell is getting at is it can't be just you know an immediate gratification. Oh, this is relevant to how do you get home after school or how do you get a
Mhm.
job.
Yeah.
And you still you know you hear I'm sure you heard that like you know why go to college you know is taking college algebra or calculus really gonna am I actually gonna use calculus in whatever I do later in life? Well, maybe not,
Yeah.
but
Well,
you
yeah,
might be.
I remember one of my high school math teachers would get that question because once you get into high school math, most of the students are just completely not interested in pre-calculus or whatever it is, and I remember vaguely what he said. He's like, I could tell you some weird like specific use that you would need to know this specific formula, but you're not going to remember that. You're not going to care about that. Chances are you're never going to use this again. But if you keep focusing like in class and you pay attention, you learn well, that gives you the ability to just have those skills, those logic reasoning skills that you'll use later on in life, right? You might not ever use this equation ever again after like the 2 weeks I'm going to spend teaching it, but you'll learn how to solve a problem, look and see what resources you have and see if it applies to the frameworks you already have and stuff like that. I thought that was a good answer, because
Yeah.
high schoolers just do not care usually about many math courses if they're not going into a very math like field after high school.
Yep. Yeah, and you have yeah, you know, you have to be able to answer that question or else
Yeah,
another line of work, you
yeah,
know.
true.
And my you know my argument with real estate laws, I told them right at the beginning it's kind of boring.
Hmm.
But that area of law actually touches your life uh, more directly and over your entire lifetime more than any other area of law. You might get divorced, so you need family law. You might get fired from your job, so you may need employment law. You might get arrested, so you might need criminal law. But real estate law is your relationship with your home.
Hmm.
Like buying a house, financing the house, signing a lease. That's what really gets their ears perked up because almost none of them. I do ask them, as long as they're willing to answer. I don't try to pry or anything. If they're homeowners or if they have a lease, and
Hmm.
almost every one of them, I think one of them might have been an older student was a homeowner, but the rest of them had a lease, and so
Right.
they're very interested in
Yeah.
that aspect of real estate law.
Yeah, well, then the next article is Julian Stanley and Bright Children. So this is about, you mentioned the death of Professor Julian Stanley of Johns Hopkins University. For decades, he not only researched and ran programs for intellectually gifted students, he became their leading advocate in books and articles. And so this whole article that he's writing about here is about how like academically gifted kids are so often just not giving the resources they need, right? They're lumped in with all of the other students. They're not given any special like advanced instruction, and that leads to a lot of them becoming resentful of the education system because they're just not able to apply what they know, and they're kind of just stuck, with everybody else. And yeah, it's essentially, yeah, he says in regular public school classrooms, these gifted students have been too often resented by their classmates and their teachers alike. Some teachers have seemed glad to be able to catch them in occasional mistakes. Right, so
Yes.
it's like you get sort of resented by the other kids in the class because if you're kind of lumped in with them, oh, you might be breaking the curve or something. You might be trying to get everybody to move a little quicker. Or you're just kind of like the odd duck out, or you have your teachers kind of angry with you or build up that sort of resentment too. It's like, well, why is this student so much farther ahead than all the others? Which I thought, that he makes really great points here that, if you want to have a gifted population, you want to keep those kids thriving, you have to have the education meet them, not just have them just sort of stuck with everybody else.
Well, yeah, and I think I mentioned this in the podcast before. That there's this weird, and I guess a natural tendency to think that if somebody is considered smarter, more intelligent, and in a gifted program, they have more moral worth. It's
Mm,
it's like it's like the person is a better person almost. And the one thing I really liked, and they've changed it now at your old high school, was at the end of the year they recognize all the people who got scholarships and all the academic honors because everybody knew who was the best scorer in basketball and football and soccer, and they cheer it. That's great. They should be cheered for those endeavors and those talents and all the work they put into it. But nobody cheers the people that got A's and everything.
hmm.
And they've modified that. They're not recognizing it to the same degree because some parents complain that their idiot kids like didn't get recognized as much as the rest of them. And I said to the principal, and that's not the description that the principal gave me. That's how I interpret it.
Yes, yeah.
And I said to the principal, I said, they should just have to sit there, you know, because because they also recognize activities,
Hmm.
best, athlete, best scholar athlete or whatever. There's a whole myriad of different things. But if their kid didn't do anything for 4 years other than, attend, they're not going to be recognized for anything because they didn't do anything. And so that's the consequence. It's like the grasshopper and the ants fable.
Yeah.
You just fool around all the time. When the bill comes due, you might not be prepared. Um, but there's a thing. It's people think, well, you're insulting my kid if you recognize that everybody has to apply for the smartest kid in class.
Hmm.
They're like, well, that's not true. He's just smarter. You
Yeah.
know, the 6'5" athletic point guard. If you have a point guard at 6'5", that's huge.
Hmm.
He gets cheered like multiple times a week. For a basketball season. What the hell are we cheering these people for? Why don't we get some cheering for the dorks that do the academic competitions?
Right.
Um,
The
anyway,
kids who
so
go to a 7 a.m. Book club in the morning.
that's correct. There should be cheerleaders.
Yeah.
Why aren't there cheerleaders?
I'll,
Anyway,
I'll propose
uh,
that.
yeah, no, I'm being a little facetious with some of it, but if you people take it personal. Like
Hmm.
they don't take it personal. Well, your kid's, slow and fat because you're like, well, yeah, I know, I get to look at them, but the intelligence thing is seen as like a personality trait,
Right.
which it is it. There's discipline and all that stuff, but I mean, some of it's just God-given talent.
Hmm.
You're just quicker, and that has to be. I'm a big advocate for this course. I have four really bright sons, but that also has to be cultivated. If you're
Hmm.
a brilliant guitar player, you need to practice it to be really good. Otherwise, you're just a wasted talent. Same thing is true with intelligence and gifted programs. That's what this Julian Stanley was
Hmm.
talking about. A program that sought out these kids so that they got that extra challenge and they were with peer groups. And it's different when you're in a classroom with a bunch of really smart kids and you're one of them. And it helps them strive and do better. And I
Yeah.
had, and well, back in the day, I kind of probably consider myself, I was pretty arrogant when I was young. I'm still fairly arrogant, but if you ask my detractors, with
Right.
which there are legion, uh, but I remember I had a elementary school teacher in eighth grade who was really sweet, um, and she didn't teach English or grammar, thank goodness, because she had terrible English and grammar, and my mom was an English teacher,
Hmm.
an English major way back in the day, and if we used incorrect grammar, she would correct us
Hmm.
100% of the time, and it just became natural in our family. If somebody couldn't use the word ain't. It's not a
Hmm.
word. She was very stickler, and I would catch myself correcting the teacher. She'd say something really grammatically incorrect, and I was seated pretty close up to the front of the class, just by her seating chart or whatever. And she's, Mr. Bishop, I don't need you to correct my grammar, and I had to really struggle hard to say, you kind of do. Yeah, coming from, I think I was either seventh grade or eighth grade. And I'm not saying I was smarter than her,
Hmm.
but I certainly knew the English language better than her. And some teachers in the elementary high school level do not appreciate I mean they hate having little kids that are a lot smarter than them,
Yeah.
and that's a big problem because there's a lot of dumb teachers. Um, because we're not getting our brightest people. There's a lot of, well, I shouldn't say dumb. There are a lot of middle of the road intelligence teachers,
Hmm.
and they can be talented teachers to a point. Like, the little joke by Norm McDonald. There was a heckler teacher that taught like 10th grade math. He says,
Hmm.
so you need an 11th grade education, right? That's so
That's
many.
really good. Yeah.
Every time I'm in a bad mood, I listen to the Norm Macdonald teacher heckler
That's good. Yeah.
audio.
Yeah, well, there's a similar theme in the next article too, anti-elitism in education. This time he's talking about New York Stuyvesant High School. He says, back in the day, it was one of the few high schools we had to take a test to even get in. And it was especially for, low income minority children and stuff like that. He says this was incredible, resource for these communities where it's
Yeah.
like if you just had a gifted kid, who'd worked, throughout, grade school and stuff like that, and you passed a test to get in, you just had so many, opportunities open up for you and things like that. He says it was fantastic, and Stuyvesant, turned out so many great, leaders in their fields and stuff like that. But then you
Hmm.
have this wave of this anti-elitism, where it's like, oh,
Yes.
well, why should they get these benefits and all these other schools don't? He says this is at the top of page 359. He says, ironically, many so-called minority quote leaders have led the charge to get top-level public schools to admit students on some basis other than academic achievement. Yet no one needs such schools more than poor and disadvantaged children who want to rise to higher levels in the economy and the society. He's like, you're just robbing all these kids of this opportunity. You have these gifted kids in these communities who could have just taken advantage of all of this and been in classes with their peers who sort of matched them where they were at in education and stuff like that. Now you've just completely wiped that out in sort of the name of
Yes.
equity or this anti-elitism that they have.
I think that's the dumbest thing that we as a nation have done in the last
Yeah.
50 years. And it's for two reasons. One, of course, you're taking away the opportunity for the economically disadvantaged people, whether they're black or white, to get that opportunity that's in the same level as the most expensive private tutoring education in the world.
Hmm.
And it used to exist. and used to be competitive to get in there. And sure, some kids missed out, but that's just too bad because you have to, just like you have to have special accommodations for the people at the very lowest end of the intelligence spectrum because they
Hmm.
need that extra help. You need the same level of resources, meaning money and time and resources put into the gifted students as you do for the people that are at the low end of the
Yeah.
spectrum. So, and we're just not doing it.
Yeah. Well, he makes
That's
the
number one. And then the second thing, let me finish this
yeah,
thought,
yeah,
and then you can argue with me, right? But
no,
the second thing is it really plays into the racist trope that African Americans can't achieve high level education because it's crushing them as a group.
hmm,
And so you don't have, if you have these schools, that these schools, and I think this is what plays into his theories about, um, you know, life may have progressed better for the entire nation if we didn't have some of these civil rights changes. I don't. He hasn't sold me on it completely, but some of them I think he's right because it was changing because they had schools like this, and it was just such clear evidence that they're equal.
yeah,
If you put them in a school of equally smart African American kids, they're going to excel. They'll be doctors and lawyers, and they'll be just as smart or smarter than any of us. Like meaning the
hmm,
non African American population. But if you just destroy their entire school,
yeah,
and there's no high achievers, you play into this thought, well, maybe they can't, and that's so dangerous. And then if you have the affirmative action saying, well, they have terrible schools, so we have to help them out, get them in colleges they wouldn't be otherwise able to get there. Then they go into these higher level colleges, and guess what? They're not prepared because they didn't have the right
right,
systems in place. Because if they did really really well and applied themselves competitively, they aren't going to get. There's a real thing in both African American and non African American predominant schools that you're acting white or you're a dork or you're
hmm,
you're bullied if you achieve academically.
right,
You don't have a baccalaureate dinner at the end of
hmm,
your academic career where everybody has to sit there and applaud for you doing great things academically. And so I think that really is played into a sense that maybe they can't, and it's just horrible. It's
right,
terrible. It's just so destructive for our society, and that just needs to change. And
yeah,
and maybe if we just get rid of the Department of Education, because that's really where these directives were really these fads were really pushed in the 80s, because
hmm,
that was created under Carter, but it wasn't eliminated by Reagan, even though he promised to.
hmm,
Trump is able to get legislation passed and just completely end it, then you might see a better ability to experiment with select schools.
hmm.
Like we have select soccer teams for crying out loud. Why can't we select academic schools? But anyway, I'm sorry, that was a little rant
Yeah,
again.
no, that's right. I was just going to say he makes the other good point. He points out Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. And he says, the original Dunbar High School has been torn down. There's this huge new modern building. And he says, back in the 1930s, Dunbar's all black student body had test scores above the national average while going to a rundown school with overcrowded classes. He says that's the result of a lot of these, initiatives. It's like you're pouring so much money into just to like completely unnecessary things. And this isn't just with these types of schools. It's with, every university ever, every high school, everywhere, every public high school, especially where it's you're just funneling so much money into like these needless renovations or just these new facilities, like the big rec center on campus here at UF. I think we have a sauna in there. There's like free massages. There's like free, yoga classes and stuff. It's this huge complex. There's a smoothie bar in the main lobby. Those aren't free. You have to pay for those. So that's like an actual business inside there. But it's like,
Yeah,
how,
but that's subsidized. That's
exactly,
taxpayer
exactly.
subsidized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if we're so many, I think of like the education, initiatives now aren't really about funding education. It's about funding everything else besides the actual education. Because it's a part of that same trend that I think he's talking about here, where it's like you don't actually want to improve the academics. You're finding all sorts of other reasons, for why things are failing, and you fund all those other reasons and not actually the academics
Yeah.
themselves.
Well, and I remember when they brought Chromebooks into Our Ladies, it was a big push in the public
Hmm.
schools. I remember going to, like, they announced, oh, we're gonna have every student's gonna have a Chromebook, and they have these big racks
Hmm.
for
Little laptops, yeah.
for the laptop, the Chromebooks to be charged in, and oh, this is great, and basically Google is trying to just mind control the youth through our school system. But I said, well, what about the books?
Hmm.
Why don't you spend money on books? And they looked at me like I was crazy. Because if you have The Catcher in the Rye, or it was a high school book, or if you
Mm,
have one of these, you don't have to get a new one every year. Unless you tear it up, you just put it back on the shelf for the next class, right? The book is still the book. It's physical.
it's true.
And I'm sure you have to repair. Somebody might drop it in a puddle or something, so you have to replace some of them every year. But like that Books Galore bookstore we used to go to, they would have a bunch of those standard books that you would need for those classes. But then I don't know. I guess they all switched to electronic versions,
Yeah.
like Animal Farm,
Hmm.
and those kind of things for high school books. And we spend so much money. Like every school now, I think Herculaneum just moved over to AstroTurf Field, so they were the last public school in our county, I think,
Hmm.
high school that still had a grass field, and they just switched over to AstroTurf or whatever they call it now. That's $1 million. These are $1 million stadiums
Yeah.
for a high school football team,
Hmm.
and occasionally used by soccer teams too, I guess. But what are we doing?
Yeah.
And the tax money that they're spending it for what?
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I'm just screaming at the clouds on that one. But Thomas Sowell is right there with me.
Yeah.
He's like you don't have to spend as much money as we do on. And I tell you, when we went on those college tours with Sam, as of course several years ago, I was astounded
Hmm.
at the resort facilities that
Yeah.
were at every college, and the rock climbing walls, and all the student study aids, the computer labs, the writing labs, and all these extra things. And of course they push, like, oh, well, your student will be safe because they have counseling. And I'm like, why would we need counseling at the school? These are
Yeah.
adults. I mean, granted, it's my kid, but what do you need? You're not their parents. And it was crazy
Yeah.
coming from me when I was a commuter. So I drove to and back to school every day. And then I worked a part-time job 5 days a week. And like that's where I went, is UMSL. And UMSL was so basic. I don't know if I've told you, but I know I
I
took
think you've mentioned it
you know,
before.
they had like their campus police and their student newspaper, and something else was in one building.
Yeah.
And it was a old, like, converted metal shed, and it was a blue metal building,
Yeah, that's right.
and
Yeah.
that the official name of it out front on a sign was Blue Metal Building. And they'd have campus maps, Blue Metal Building. And then they still have the tower, which was like offices for the professors and all that. And the building was called what? The Tower.
Tower.
Because it's the tower. And it was just so, I mean, and the architecture wasn't great, but it's so utilitarian because it was supposed to be functional for a lot of working people. I mean, almost everybody I knew that was a student there had a job, a lot of them full-time jobs.
Hmm.
But now it's like, well, you just go and party for 4 years,
Yeah.
and maybe you go to class. And Gainesville is
Yeah.
beautiful. It's
Hmm.
huge.
Well,
But
that's yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
That's what's crazy to me is sometimes there's an area just north of campus called Midtown, and that's where like a bunch of like the undergraduate like bars, hangout spots are, right off campus. I'll be driving around there sometimes in the evenings. It'll be like Monday, Tuesday evening at like 6:30, 7 p.m., and I'll see people and they're like clearly, dressed to go out and party for a couple hours. I'm like, what degree are you getting that you can do that on a Monday night? Like, do you not have any work to do? It's crazy to me.
Uh, Teaching. They're getting education degrees.
There you go.
Social work, sociology,
Yeah.
all the social sciences.
Right. Yeah. I guess
Every
that's
last
true.
one of them.
Yeah. Well, that kind of ties in a little bit to the next article. It's called "The Old Neighborhood." And this one, they're not really like a specific topic. He's really railing against. This one's just
Yes,
about sort of the general like vibe, I guess, of his old community. He's
yes,
reminiscing back on his old community and how people were just not willing to take any form of charity. Right? There was
yes.
this just immense like pick yourself up by your bootstraps. If you put in the effort, you will make it and you will get things done. And he's looking at the neighborhood now, and it's just like what happened? What changed? Clearly, this is not the same. And of course, he mentions, Stuyvesant High School again, and things like that, where you had all these great initiatives and you had these great, opportunities if you're willing to put in the effort and make them work. Now they're just gone. They've just been leveled,
Yep.
right? And in their place are just these, kind of mindless calls for equity or what have you, where it's just not actually achieving anything. It's just been leveled.
Yeah. It's so well written. A brief little article about that, and it's poignant. And all I can think about, as I think I mentioned before, when I watch TV, I don't seem to watch anything that was actually created during my lifetime. It's always older than that, like Gunsmoke.
Right.
Although the Rock Files, I was a kid, and so the commercials are geared towards people even older than me. And so it's reverse mortgages,
Hmm.
hearing aids.
Right.
Now it's really interesting to me. I don't know if I mentioned this. Those new bathtubs that you
Yes,
like
you,
sit
you've you've
in.
mentioned
Okay,
this before.
I
Yes.
haven't read. But the thing that always gets as the old saying is, gets my goat, gets me aggravated, is the Medicare benefits supplemental
Mm,
advertisements, especially around whenever they're, I don't know what time of year it is that they have to the annual enrollment sign up, and it's always, this is the pitch: 100% get what you're entitled to receive from the government. Don't
yeah.
miss out on your entitlement benefits because you don't want to miss out what you're entitled. And it's all well and good, but it's that whole mentality of getting something for nothing from the government,
Hmm.
and basically leeching off everybody else. And I guess I shouldn't segue into a rant about the boomers, who really destroyed the society that he is describing from his youth.
Hmm.
The baby generation murdered it,
Yeah.
and now we have to figure out, okay, what's valuable from that old society that we can recreate from
Yeah.
scratch.
I had a priest give a homily on that exact topic just a couple
All
weeks ago.
right.
It was actually just like a railing against the baby boomers, right? It's pretty funny because he's an older guy too, and he was kind of apologizing like on behalf of the generation because it's a very much like college student crowd. And I forget exactly what the master news were. He tied it in somehow, but he's like, I look around at this society we're giving you young people. I'm like, what did we do? Why did we do this to you? We've
Yeah.
just lost so much of everything. And that's kind of a good segue into the next article titled Wasting Minds.
Yes.
And this is talking about Menlo Atherton High School, which is in an affluent California community. And essentially, this is about how this high school was treating its students like guinea pigs, right? You have these
Mhm.
new sort of social justice initiatives where it's like, well, if you sort of take it from this angle, everybody's going to improve and stuff like that. And they're essentially testing all these programs on these kids. And one of those was the science class that he talks about, where it's like if you mix essentially the top students with the worst students, it's this idea that the top students will help bring the worst students up, and sort of the whole class will rise as one. He says it was just a complete failure, right? Because the high achieving students were just not getting the attention that they needed. And this is sort of the goal of a lot of our high schools these days, and a lot of our education system. This kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier. But again, it's like that idea. It's like we have to figure out some other problem that we need to solve other than just treating the actual education that these kids are
Yes.
receiving, right? We have to just keep
Yes.
trying these weird little experiments rather than just doing what we know works, in the first place.
Right. Right. And it goes, he's talking about, educational groupings, so
Hmm.
you're bringing in the lower achievers and you're mixing them together. They're all going to learn from each other, and it'll all be great, utopia or whatever. But now it's gone beyond that to like other types of groups. And coincidentally, yesterday I have, as part of my uh, indoctrination into the higher education, I have to take annual training,
Hmm.
and the Title IX training, the anti-discrimination training this year was off the hook compared to even last year.
Really?
Was morally offensive and legally questionable. I'm going to read to you, and it's a little off topic, but they're so pushing.
Hmm.
Like Title IX, I'm old enough to remember it was to get equality for women in higher education. That
Hmm.
was the whole purpose behind it. Especially the most prominent one was sports. They had safe space and all that kind of stuff. Even literally safe space because they wanted to cut down on sexual assaults, which is really
Right.
important and all.
Yeah.
But as far as the like keeping the athletic programs, blah 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 blah, equal funding and all that. But I'm gonna, please indulge me because this is a
Sure.
little bit of a topic. But yeah, I meant to thought about sending this to you, but I didn't. So I got a question partially wrong.
Oh no.
I knew it was partially wrong. Question: uh, which four best practices can help protect LGBTQI students?
Hmm.
The entire lecture was, you have to watch a video and take a test. The
Mm-hmm.
entire thing about Title IX was about how you have to treat transgender people.
Mm.
They're protected under Title IX, and you have to use their pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
And this, and how you, so the first option,
Mm-hmm.
how you can help protect LGBTQI. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
even sure I know what all of them are,
They didn't
but
include the plus. They usually have the plus to make sure they
there's
get
no
everybody.
plus.
Oh, that's
There's
interesting.
no plus.
Should sue them for discrimination.
So there's five options. I have to
Mm-hmm.
pick four of them.
Mm-hmm.
First, make public statements in support of LGBTQI students.
Mm-hmm.
Two, punish any discriminatory or harassing behavior. Three, train faculty and staff to respond to complaints or intervene in harmful situations. The fourth is enforce all Title IX and related rules and regulations for offenses. And the last one is require transgender students to use facilities appropriate for the sex that they were assigned at birth. All right. So 4 out of 5. Guess what? Now the middle three
Mm-hmm.
I think are technically fine because you're talking
Yes.
about, you want to, you don't want to hassle these people,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, and so and if they're being
Sure.
discriminated against because
Sure.
of their mental illness, you don't want to hassle them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If some dude in college wants to show up in a dress, knock yourself out, sweetheart. You're right. You're supposed to call him sweetheart, aren't you? I don't
I think so. I think that's right.
know. But I got this partially wrong because I did not select make public statements in support of LGBTQI students. They're training. They're telling me that is required of me. I got a wrong
Mm-hmm.
answer because I didn't say I, and quite frankly, I think that's a violation of my First Amendment right
Mm.
because it's saying I have to say something in support of something.
Right.
Secondly, it violates my right of conscience, my right of religion.
Mm-hmm.
My religion does not support
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQI whatever
Mm-hmm.
because it's anathema. It's sinful conduct,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
By its very definition, it is prohibited by the Bible. Now,
Yes.
it's not to say I should go out and say repent sinner, although maybe I
Mm-hmm.
should.
You know.
But as a teacher, I shouldn't. I
Mm-hmm.
agree with that,
Yeah.
especially if I'm a public employee. I'm not going
Sure.
to do that
Sure.
because I'm not going to impose my religion on them.
Right.
But I shouldn't have to say something in support. And then what's wrong? I mean, if I'm really going to help protect LGBTQI students, shouldn't I require the dudes to go in the dude bathroom? I mean, isn't that how I protect the lesbians? Right? Because the lesbians all want to go to the bathroom with other lesbians, right? I reconcile that. So his title of this particular article is "Wasting Minds," because it's a fad of putting like these academically overachievers and underachievers in the same classroom, and of course the parents revolted and were called racist or whatever. But eventually, at that time, it was rescinded. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, it was brought back tenfold. But now we have not only those pushes, but we have these weird pushes about their sexual identity
Right.
and all the way down to elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a public university, a college, that's instructing their faculty in violation, in my opinion, of the teacher's constitutional rights, and certainly in violation of Title IX. That's not an accurate statement of the law. I
Yeah.
don't have to celebrate anybody. That's crazy talk.
Mm.
So I did take the time to do a course evaluation and submit it.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I know one of the things that I know Title IX can be used for is to threaten students when you don't like what they've said on the student radio show. That's my most immediate experience in Title IX.
Yeah, student radio show that is designed for political discussions.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it was a political discussion program that had been on the
Mm-hmm.
radio station for years, but you can't talk politics
Mm-hmm.
on that radio
Yes.
program.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
evidently you can, after, there's a threat of legal action.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Weirdos.
it's very strange.
The change can't happen soon enough. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That was like my fourth rant.
That's all right. Well, the
Too
next
much.
article is titled "Do Facts Matter?" and this one was really
Mm,
interesting too, because he starts out by talking about this really nice email he got from a really thoughtful person. He says, that this guy was emailing me. He says, I can only imagine what it must have been like for you back in the day when you were going through the education system in the 50s, early 60s, how
mm,
much racism you must have faced. And he says, well, I didn't really face anything. Right? People you just don't realize that. This is what
yes.
Thomas Sowell is saying, and he says, I really liked his quote here. He says, I cannot recall a single racist word or deed at any of these institutions. The closest thing to a racist remark was made about a student from England who was referred to as, quote, nasty, British, and short, end quote. It was I who made that remark. So he says, there really wasn't any animosity. But then once you start, having this idea, because the idea behind a lot of the affirmative action hiring is that you needed to have this critical mass of minority students on campus for them to feel safe, right? And that's when you start to see pushback and animosity against those students, because then
Right.
you, like we talked about last time, once you start sort of implementing that wide scale, you get a whole bunch of people who feel like they've been robbed of a position, if they don't get
Mm,
in, or they feel like they've been robbed of a spot in one of their classes or something like that, or robbed of an honor or something like that they should have received. And he says, and then that's where you start to see, sort of the reemergence of
yeah.
some sorts of racist attitudes, where you have people requesting not to be housed with black people,
Yeah.
in the dorms and stuff like that. And that was in the 80s, right? He says, I didn't see any of that in the 50s, and none of that was going on when I was in school. But then once you start, pushing things so aggressively in the opposite direction, then you're going to expect some pushback. And of course, we shouldn't be be engaging in those things. That's not justifying, the racist attitudes and stuff like that. But it's easy to see how that can happen.
Well, sure. And especially now because they have black only dorms,
Right.
and sanctioned separation of the races,
Hmm.
which to me is just wild because when I was a kid, they had all the high profile desegregation cases, and busing cases. And,
Hmm.
Joe Biden was famously one of the most outspoken critics of busing. And that's why Kamala Harris called him a racist
Hmm.
in the debate, in the primaries when he was running the first time.
So
Well,
much
not
of a
the
racist
first
that
time
she
for
wanted to
him,
be
but
his vice president. It's crazy how that works out.
that's right. So yeah, so it's wild that it's like a push to go back, but it's like but it's different because um it's not to go back to just separate and equal. It's separate and superior. They
Hmm.
want better facilities for African American students. It's crazy. I mean, I
Yeah.
just don't. It's so destructive of a functioning society and goodwill to everybody. It's
Hmm.
just, it hurts everybody
Yeah.
in
The
the
next
long run.
article, yeah, I thought was really good too. And this plays into the kind of shallow people is what he calls it. Deep trouble from shallow people, going into what you were talking about earlier about all the people in the education system who just aren't that bright.
Yeah.
Is really his main point here. And the example he gives is there's an Asian American girl applying to Wesleyan University with test scores in the 1400s, and a Dominican girl applying to the same institution with test scores in the 900s. A member of the admissions committee recommended against admitting the Asian American girl and in favor of admitting the Dominican girl. He says, well, what's the justification for that? Is because, well, the Dominican girl had more barriers to overcome, and therefore she deserves it more than the Asian American girl. It's like we don't know that for sure,
Right.
but
Right.
that's what these people think who are all in all these admissions boards, and a lot of these people have so much power, really over a lot of people's lives. And he goes,
Yes.
beyond just these college admissions boards. They're like, yeah, they kind of mean well, but they're just so shallow and just don't actually consider anything with any depth. One of the other examples he gives is all of the minority children who can't get adopted because a lot of the people in the foster care system or the adoption system don't want white parents adopting minority children because they see it
Mhm.
as wrong somehow. Well, they should be with their own community. Well, that just hurts the children because then they're just stuck in the foster care system forever when there would have been a family who was more than willing to adopt them. It just makes things worse for that poor child in the long run.
Yeah. And there's so many kids that need to be adopted, especially in the state system, the foster care system. That for private adoption, I don't know if it's still true, but I used to do a lot of adoptions, and the adoption agencies would charge a lower fee if you adopted an African American kid,
Really? Huh.
significantly lower, like less than half of the
Wow.
fees charged. And these are, like 20 grand for an
Hmm.
adoption agency. They'd have to do home studies and all this and that. But the fees were always exorbitant. I thought they were confiscatory in a lot of respect, but the parents are going to pay them. And a lot of times, church groups will pay
Right.
them.
Right.
So the church membership would get together and they'd fund it.
Hmm.
Between the group of them, so they get full $20,000 in fees. But if they're going to adopt a black kid, it's 10,000. That's
Hmm.
crazy. I was like, wait a
Yeah.
second, there's something wrong with that. I don't
Yeah.
know what it is. Is it a discount? Um, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing. And the more race conscious we are, the less likely it is people will want to adopt a child of a different race,
Yeah.
because you get questioned by it. And it's like, well, how do you do that? I don't know. I'm going to raise them like a I don't know, suburban white kid. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to raise him like a kid, like my kid, and I
Hmm.
am me, and so I'm going to raise him like me. I don't know what else do you do. I mean,
Yeah.
we're going to do like a soul brother handshake every day or something. I mean, if you do that, then you're treating them, wrong. I think you're
Yeah.
not treating them as an individual. You're just treating them as you would from any other family member. So it raises all these other issues, and it's because people, like he says, are shallow people, and like he says, he's saying that the person who's in the admissions committee saying, well, I'm willing to take a chance on her, and he makes the point, well, yeah, you're taking the chance, but you're not footing the bill.
Yeah.
You won't be
It's
around.
it's no chance for you. You have no
Right.
stake in this. Yeah.
Yes.
It does not impact you.
Yeah, you're giving this, but
Hmm.
it's not you giving it. You're standing in for the rest of us, and I see that that's a frustration I have to keep my mouth shut about in all my public entity meetings, because invariably the elected officials, elected and appointed officials, will just pay for things. They'll pay
Hmm.
people off that have frivolous claims, or they'll pay for things that they, if it was their money, they wouldn't even think about doing it.
Hmm.
And I very rarely hear, well, what about the taxpayers? They don't think about, when they give big fat raises to people, they don't think about rolling the taxes back. They just,
Yeah.
well, we got this money.
Hmm.
And that ARPA money, which was like the post-COVID money, the money after the COVID,
Yeah.
that was, I don't know, $1 trillion.
Yeah.
That money is they're distributing it. I think the last of it this year. So the projects have to be completed this year, maybe by June, I think. And so I think if you see a contraction, especially in government spending, it's not just Doge, it's the ARPA money running out,
Mm.
because that has flowed to literally every town, every state, county, and town in this nation
Wow.
has got a piece of that ARPA money. Like, for instance, there's um, an electric vehicle charging station in one of my little towns,
Hmm.
100% funded by ARPA.
It's ridiculous.
It was used 9 times in the last 3 months. Big success.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, somewhere around that number. Don't,
Yeah.
don't quote me on the number, but it was like in a 3 month period of time. Of course, people don't even know where it's there,
Yeah.
but evidently it'll get put on the map,
Hmm.
and in theory, it'll increase over time.
Interesting.
But that anyway. But
Yeah.
it's other people's money, so
Hmm.
let's give it away. Oh, aren't they so generous?
Yeah.
And you'll see like these college, like I think there's a Roy Blunt building in the Mizzou campus.
There's one at Truman State. There's
Yeah,
a Roy and I don't know. I don't remember his
yeah.
wife's name, but
She's a
Roy and
lobbyist.
yeah,
Yeah,
Roy and wife's
his,
name Blunt Academic Success Center or something. It's
his
on
second wife.
Truman's campus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he didn't spend a dime
Hmm.
on,
Yeah.
on any of the funding, but because he was a senator and he got earmarks, he gets buildings named after him. Strom
Yeah.
Thurmond was a big one, a racist.
Yeah.
Strom Thurmond was head of the Ku Klux Klan and a close friend of Biden's, by the way.
There
Anyway,
you go. Now, well, the next article goes back to the first article we talked about, the quote unquote good teachers.
yes,
And this, he's talking about a teacher that he was replacing, at one of his first teaching
yeah,
appointments.
this
And
is
he's
a
like,
great
yeah,
article.
I didn't even want to, say the word replacing because he was held in such high esteem by all the students. Everybody loved him. He was just, everybody had this idea that he was such a great teacher. And then when we went in to teach the class, he realized that, so many of the students just did not understand sort of the basics of the economics,
Right.
where it's like a different teacher, a less popular teacher. All of the students under him were much farther ahead in terms of what they actually knew. So he's saying, this teacher, might have been really popular and he might have been really engaging, but if he didn't actually teach the material, what's the point? Right?
Right.
You have this
Right.
beloved teacher, but it's like, well, why do people love him? Right? Clearly not for the right reasons if they're not actually learning from his class.
Yes. It kind of reminds me of your descriptions of and we don't have to say the university, but the university president that had like a cult following, but 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 presided over year over year over year declining enrollment,
Yeah.
budget cutbacks, program cutbacks, and would probably be a failed university if they don't get rid of her.
Mm.
But very popular,
Hmm.
at the time. Now I don't know if she's as popular because the
Yeah.
faculty cuts, um, but it's that popularity thing. But as he says, like the big quote is this a quote from scripture? By their fruits, ye shall know them.
Yes.
Like what's the output? Are they
Hmm.
actually educating people as opposed to just being everybody's buddy? And any teacher, myself included, could be everybody's buddy and give everybody A's. But what have you actually taught them? And of course, I try to take seriously being engaging and interesting, but I think most of it is I just have to be interested myself
Hmm.
in teaching them, and of course you have to know it. But he makes a good point. Just because they're a popular teacher doesn't mean they're a good teacher. And and I'm not on Rate My Professor yet, but I
We'll
have
see.
checked it out of other people. Like just randomly search for instructors or professors. And it seems like they're fairly fair.
Hmm.
They give a rating of how hard they grade, but there'll be comments in there. Well, this is super easy, but you won't learn anything.
Hmm.
You'll definitely get an A, or it'll be like really challenging, but you'll learn a lot. And anyway, I think that's a one of the modern changes that we didn't have when I
Yeah.
was a college student, which I think is generally good. Of course, I'll
Yeah.
have to change my opinion when I get defamed.
0 out of 5 on Rate My Professor. Yeah.
I'm going to get one. Sure.
But the last two articles in this section are very, very similar in their theme. It's behind publisher perish and then glimpses of academe. And so really he's talking about this really weird idea that we have in the modern university where the research is so much more prioritized than the actual teaching. Right,
Yep.
it's the publisher perish, right? If you don't have X amount of articles that you publish every year, you are much less likely to have your contract renewed before you get tenure. And that's one of the big factors in getting tenures, how many articles you've published while you've been at this university. And the point he makes is that so much of this is just, well, A, taking away time that the professors are actually preparing for class and teaching students, and
Right.
B, making them just churn out a bunch of nonsense articles,
Hmm.
right? If you have this pressure, oh, I have to write, 2 articles this year. Well, you're not going to really spend too much time on either one to make sure that they're really top-notch research, right? If
Right.
you don't really have a topic, but you have to write something, you're going to write something. And it might not be a good topic. You might not have any good research to do. And of course, he says, so much of this comes from, the state and federal research funding that just pours into the universities.
It's
And
federal. There's no
yeah,
state money.
yeah,
I mean, there's really, I mean, it's maybe in California or one of the big states,
hmm,
but it's all federal money,
yeah,
and they change up the national. What was it? Because some of it goes through the national. What is it called for health, and then the for arts, but a lot of it's through the Department of Education. And if they really do cut that stuff out, it'll make a huge difference.
hmm.
And but I love this quote. He says, "It's hard to imagine how the world would be any worse off on sorry on net balance if the entire output of the sociology profession over the past 50 years had never been published." Ooh, that's brutal.
Yeah,
But he's right. That's where the funding comes from for the research grants. So that that's a bottom line issue, and the publisher perish, or else you're
hmm,
not going to keep a job. So even if you're a good teacher by all the metrics and people are learning everything, that's just not the focus, and it's so
yeah,
stupid, And you would figure that they would have a way um, to reward good, effective teachers.
hmm,
And that goes into, I think, the next one where he's talking about,
yeah,
when you get when you're a faculty member and you get an award for being a good teacher, it's like the kiss of death, and because you will not get tenure
yeah,
because you're focusing on educating the students as
yeah,
opposed to your other duties that actually reward you.
yeah.
with a promotion, and you're also kind of making everybody look bad.
Yeah. I liked a couple of the quotes in here. He says the Chronicle of Higher Education survey, which was talking about, look at how much we've published, these past years, did not get into the quality or relevance of what is published. But editors of leading scholarly journals in various fields have said that much of the research that is done is a waste of time,
Yeah.
right? And of course, a waste of money. And then I really liked, part of this survey that was in this Chronicle. He says. The least surprising finding from this survey is that liberalism reigns supreme in academia. Three-quarters of the professors are for a national health care plan to cover everybody's medical costs. However, a statement that the undergraduate curriculum should be based on Western civilization gets only a 53% agreement,
Yes.
right? And so it's like this idea, should we teach the things that have shaped our modern education system, our entire society, here in the West? About half of people say yes, but then
Yeah.
75%, over 75% say, yeah, we should have a national healthcare plan to cover everybody's medical costs. That's just a whopping, just difference there.
Yes.
I'm surprised. Honestly, I think if you ran this survey today, I think you get less than 53%. I think it'd be less than the majority
Yes.
now. I mean, depending on the university, depending on the department, but I think
Yeah.
overall,
And you get a higher percentage for the state healthcare plan.
yeah,
The
yeah.
single payer, so-called. So a single payer, it's a universal payer.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I
he
want a
says,
single payer healthcare. Wait, that's not a single. Who is this one person? It's all of us, you knucklehead. Anyway, good.
yeah, well, he says, the next sentence there's only 28% thought it essential or very important to teach students the classic works of Western civilization, while 80% thought that colleges should encourage students to get involved in community service activities.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, the people, 53% say it should be based on Western civilization, but only 28% are able to say that it's actually essential and actually necessary. And of course, I think those numbers would be much, much lower now.
Yeah, and I think part of that goes back to some of the original points, which kind of defames teachers. But teaching the great books of Western civilization or great works of Western civilization, is that they're difficult.
Yeah.
Some of them, and they're complex and they're interesting, and you have to understand it well enough to teach it,
Hmm.
and that's not easy. You
Yeah.
have to be an expert in it, and as opposed to the touchy-feely BS that fills so much of our educational system
Right.
currently, and that's easy because it's everybody, it's your opinion. You've been spoon-fed it, your entire college career, and you got to put a rainbow flag in your room,
Yeah.
and talk about gender. What the hell are you talking about? This is this geography.
Yeah.
Where's that flag? Where's that country? We're gonna plant that. Plant that flag in the country of, oh, I won't say it. LGBTQI.
There you go.
I got to make more public statements in favor of them. I guess maybe I get fired if they listen to if anybody listens to this
You
podcast.
might.
Because I'm not going to issue a statement in favor of them.
Yeah.
Although if I got fired for that, I'd have a great lawsuit. Right?
There
Because
you
that's
go.
100% protected speech, because it would be compelled. It'd be government compelled speech, and that's tough to
Yeah.
government to justify that.
For
That's
sure.
nuts.
Yeah. Well, I think we might only have two more episodes left in the book.
Yes.
We have one more section on biographical sections, and then another just on random thoughts. It's a pretty short section there at the end where he just kind of has a whole bunch of quotes about whatever I guess was on his mind when he was writing that.
Yes.
So probably two more episodes, and we've got to decide what we're doing next episode
Yes.
or next season.
Have you thought of anything?
I'm thinking I probably shouldn't get any new books and should take a book off of one of the two bookshelves that I have behind me.
Pick any one of them, and I'll get
Yes.
myself a copy.
Well, I was thinking maybe Democracy in America, Tocqueville,
Oh yeah, because we
or
did
we
the
could,
Orestes Bronson. Yeah,
yeah,
because I haven't. I think I pretended to read Democracy in America when I was an undergrad.
yeah. I was thinking either
Even
that or an older classic. I don't know. I have the Divine Comedy up there. I have a whole bunch of other stuff. I don't know. I'll send some options maybe.
yes,
Maybe
yeah.
maybe we'll do another Twitter poll where like two people will vote and
It'd be the two of
people,
us.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's a good plug. You can follow us on Twitter, of course, at ULMTD Opinions, or I guess on X. Sorry, I always say Twitter, but
Yeah,
I
that's
guess
true.
it's technically X now. Yeah. Now, would you have any other final thoughts for this episode?
No, I've already said too much.
Well, there we go. Well, you can tweet us some suggestions, maybe if you have any other thoughts. All the many listeners out there. But this has been season 10, episode 15 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
Let's hope you don't get fired.